In this tutorial, we're going to create the gun asset pictured in the center. I've created this breakaway so you can see the relationship between the modeling process and then the bump map process we'll use to put the details on the gun. So this will be a combination of the extrude tool, the edge loop tool, and the toolkit to create some of the basic pieces of geometry that you see here, where there's a bit of a dimension to the model, and then a gray through black texture map created in Photoshop to put in the details that you see with screws and some of these other textures that appear on the model itself. In order to get started, I'm going to go to my front view of the template, where I'm looking at the complete profile here. We're going to start by using a polygon cube. So hold down my space bar, go to create polygon primitives cube, and I'm going to drag a rough shape that will comprise the barrel of this gun. I'll return to my perspective view, and I'll just give it a bit of a thickness. Once again, I'm going to the profile view where I can see the template and the geometry. And I've introduced ghosting. Ghosting is the two interlocking white boxes that you would see on each viewport right here. And that will allow me to mute the geometry, see it, but also see my template behind it. Next, I'm going to start dropping some polygon edges in here using the edge loop tool, which will help me define some of the basic shapes that we'll be extruding. The insert edge loop tool looks like this. The box with the broken orange line going through it. If that doesn't appear on your shelf, you can hold down Command Shift. You can go to Mesh Tools and click on Insert Edge Loop. Using the color-coded template, I'm going to now drop the edge loops I want. This is something you would probably work out on your own model before you started the process. Alright, so I've got some basic lines dropped in. I'm going to work with the barrel in the front, so I'll go to my vertexes and I'll grab those and I'll start to rotate them into the general position that they'll be in when they're finished. I'm going to be extruding the top part of the barrel, so I'm going to minimize the height a bit. And I'm going to move some of these vertices in here. I'm going to make a kind of a aesthetic judgment here. I'll make the rest of it kind of thin because this piece will be out further. I want it to be a little bit accentuated. The green will be a little bit wider in the z-axis as well. So I'm tapering the entire piece now to reflect the thickness or thinness, however you want to look at this, for these two areas here as well as the stock. I'm going to right click and choose face, and I'm going to start to select the faces that I want to extrude here. Now I'm going to turn off the template as well so we can see better what's going on. I want to do the other side as well. And I'm holding the shift key, and I can hold a shift control so that I don't lose anything I've already selected. You want to be a little bit careful about how you do this so that you don't select the wrong faces and end up with extrusions that you can't see perhaps on the other side. Now that I have the selection I want, I'll click on my extrude tool, and this is where it becomes pretty subjective because you'll just have to decide how thick your model should be. So you can see if I've extruded that out. Now I'm just going to take off the ghost for a moment. You can see what that looks like. Now we're going to do this in a couple of other places. So I'm going to put my template back on just to see what's going on here. And I'll go back to Ghost. And the next area I want to extrude is the green area. That would be the next thickest. Now I've got this angle to deal with here. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to use the toolkit. The toolkit's located in the upper right hand corner of the user interface. It appears to be a little cube with a hammer on it. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to give me this menu to work from. And what I want to do carefully is use the multi-cut tool, which looks like a number 11 X-Acto knife blade here. And I'll go in and cut where I need to add that little angle that I see there. I'll hit return as I join it. I'm going to turn off my template for a moment, and that'll allow me to rotate around my viewport and do the other edge. You just want to be really careful that you don't drop lines that you don't want. I'll hit return, and now I'm ready to extrude that area. I'll put my template back on just to make sure, and then I'll right click and choose face, and I'll carefully select the faces that I want to extrude out here. Once I have one side done, I'm turning off the template so I can see through where I need to select on the other side. And I'm going to do the other side as well. Holding the shift and control, I'll click on the appropriate faces. And I'm just moving this around just to make sure that nothing's selected that shouldn't be. Now it looks pretty good. I'll click on my extrude poly tool, and I'll scale that out as well using the Z-axis arrow. And I'm making this a little thinner than the front of the gun itself. So you can see we've got two levels. I'll take the ghost off for a moment. We can see what's going on here. I'll put my template back on. So I've got my reference, and I'll put the ghost on. Now I'm going to extrude the cartridge clip and the handle. And I can see I need a couple more paths to do that. So I'll get my edge loop tool, and I'll start to put them in roughly in the place that I know I'm going to need them. And I'll return to my perspective view. I'm going to turn off the template for a moment and right click and choose face, and start to select the faces that I need here. That looks pretty good. So now I'll go to my side view again. I'll click on my extrude tool. I'm going to center it this time, and I'll start to pull these down. And it gets pretty subjective again here, where you introduce those extrusions. But what I'm going to do now is start to rough it in with a few and then come back with the edge loop. So now that I've got these kind of in position, I'll hit G on the keyboard again, and maybe I'll center that one more time, pull down the next level, and you can kind of see what's going on here. Now, I'm going to refine this a bit now by going in and just moving these vertices here and here so I can extrude these down at the angle I want. So I'll just zoom in a bit, right click, choose vertex. I'm being very careful to drag through the vertices in question. I'm going to drag all the way to here. Now, I'm going to hit E on the keyboard to get my rotation tool, and it's not quite what I want here. So if I was to hold down D on the keyboard, I can move the pivot to where I might really want to rotate this. So when I let go, I can now tip that area up and get the angle that I want more closely. I'll do the same on this side. Holding down D, move the pivot, let go, and rotate it up. The key to this is choose your rotation tool before you move the pivot, because it's specific to the tool that's selected. With the move tool, it would just be moving the pivot for the move tool and not the rotation. All right, so I'm going to return to my perspective view again, and I'll select the faces that I need to extrude for the clip as well as the handle. I'll go to my side view again, and I'll click on my extrusion tool, and I'll start to pull them down. Now I'm going pretty much down as far as I think I need to, because then I'll go and start to customize these once it's roughed in, which it appears to be now. And I'll start to work on these individually. So I'll right click and choose vertex, and I'll start over here, and I'll take my move tool and start to put that into position and start to rotate it. And I'll do the same here, rotating and moving. We're going to turn off the template so we can see what we have. So you can see we've got quite a bit done with just some minimal amount of polygons. Now I'm looking at my poly faces up here, and you'll see that the faces are only 190. So I'm really being very cautious about how much geometry I add here. Put the template back on, and now I can start doing a little bit of refinement on this. I'll zoom in on it, and I'll start to add an edge here perhaps, and I'll start to tweak this using the move tool. Now I'm not using 3 on the keyboard because this is for a game environment, so I wouldn't run the smooth on it. It would make the poly count of the model prohibitive. Now we're going to roughen the stock by extruding as well. So I'll go to my perspective view, and I'll select the faces that I'm going to use here. And I'll turn off my template to make sure I've got what I want. I'll go to my side view of the template, and I'll click on the extrude tool. And then I'm going to extrude down from here, this section. So once again, I'll return to my perspective view, and I'll just turn off the template for a moment, and I'll select the faces in question. And I'll return to my side view, click on the extrude, and I think I'll center that so I can pull it straight down. And I'm going to add another face here so that I can pull this in and get that corner. So I'll just hit G, or I'll click on the extrude button on my dock again, and I'll pull that next section down. Now I'm going to start moving some vertices around here to make that angular piece at the bottom of the stock. So I'll start here, I'll drag this all the way over there, and then I'll come up and grab these two and move these into position as well. And I'll grab this edge, and I want to rotate it from this point here, so once again I'll hold down D, move the pivot down there. When I let go, my rotation tool will be located where I want it, and I'll just tip that in. Let's turn off the template to see what we've got so far. Alright, so we've roughed in pretty much the gun as far as the stock and the bullet clip and the body of it. Now we need to do the barrel. So let's go to our perspective view first, and we'll see what we've got here. And I'm going to turn off the template for a moment, and I'm going to take the ghost off so I can see my geometry a little bit better. So we've got these two edges that'll work pretty well. I think I want to move them a little closer though, so that the barrel, perhaps when we look straight on, isn't quite that thick. Well, that's pretty good actually, but I think I'm going to tape it a bit. So I'm going to right click and choose edge. I'll start here, going to my move tool, and I'll rotate around to the very front, and hold down the shift and double click, and it'll give me the whole edge perhaps. I'm going to hit 4 to make sure it has. Now it didn't do it, it went around the other way, so I'm going to do it a little bit more gradually. I'll select here, double click a couple of faces or edges down, and doing it gradually and so on. There we go. And I'll do the other side now. We'll go down 2 or 3, hold the shift, double click. Alright, now, oops, it selected this edge as well, so I'll just hold the shift and click on them to take them out of the mix. Anything I don't want in this. Now, this is where you want to be careful as well, and this is where your wireframe is pretty helpful. It'll show you pretty clearly if you've selected anything that you may not have wanted to. I'll get my scale tool and I'll taper it in a bit. I'm going to select the face so I can extrude up and get the shape of our barrel going. I'll right click and choose face, select this, hold the shift and double click, oops, there we go. And now I'm going to click on the extrude tool. I'll center it. I'm going to pull it up a bit. And I'm probably going to put yet another edge in there with the polygon tool. So I'll hit G, center it one more time, pull it up a little bit, and then I'll taper it in like that to give it a little bit more of a roundness. And I'm being very mindful of my polygon count. I'm at 260, and that's still pretty good. And you can see we're getting a pretty decent shape here. Alright, so I'm going to go to my side view of the model again here. I'll put my template on. And I'm going to kind of work with this little angle that appears at the back end of this. I'll right click, choose vertex. I'll start to move these into position. I'm going to put this pretty close. Now, and then I'll turn off my template. I want to work on the front as well, so I'll put it back on. And I'll tip that in. Now we're going to create the opening for the trigger. So I'll zoom in on that area, and I'm going to click and drag on this particular face so that goes through the other side as well. And I'm going to delete them both. I'll turn off the template to confirm that I have deleted both those faces. Now I'm going to my perspective and I'm carefully going to extrude edges on both sides of this. So I'll right click and choose edge. And if I double click on this edge, and hold the shift and double click on the one on the other side, I can see that they're selected out brown. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard and you can see that it's pretty easy to see what we've got here. Now I'm going to extrude them, so I'll click on the extrude button and I'll center it, and then I'm going to start to scale the edges in on the top and the sides. So I'll hit 5 on the keyboard and you can see what we just did. We added some more geometry to give this a little thickness down here. I'll right click and go to my object mode. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the toolkit again. So I'll click on the little hammer with the cube, and now I can use the bridge tool. I'll right click, choose edge again, and I'll shift and double click on the newly formed edge on that side and the same on this side. Hitting 4, we can see that they're both selected. I'll go over to the modeling toolkit and I'll click on bridge. I'll hit 5 on the keyboard and you can see now that we've filled in the area for the trigger. We'll go to our orthographic side view and let's create the trigger for this. Holding down the space bar, go to create polygon primitives cube, drag a bit of a cube like this, returning to the perspective view to give it some thickness, and I'll move it into position. And I'll return to the side view of the model. And now I want to model a bit of a trigger here. I'll use my edge loop tool to do so. And I'm just dropping these in a couple of positions, being mindful of the polygon count. And then I'll start to model this. I hit the up arrow so that I can go to the next grouping of vertices, or I could have just marquee selected them. And I'll scale those in. And perhaps with this I'll move it over. Return to my object mode. And let's go to perspective view and see what we've got so far. Alright, so that could be a little thinner, so I'll go ahead and taper that a bit like that. And I'll pull it up so I see the bottom edge of it. Now, the next thing we want to do is put our barrel and then some basic sights that would be on a rifle. I'm going to go to my front view on this, and I'll hit F on the keyboard to zoom in on the model because the barrel is going to be introduced in this front view, looking at it from the front. We're using a cylinder, so I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cylinder. I'll drag a bit of a footprint outside of my model so I can get at this a little easier. Returning to the perspective view, I can now give it a little bit of length. And I'll start to use my orthographic views to put this into position. I want this to be a little thicker. I'll scale it up. And I don't want this many polygon faces. This has got 60 faces alone, so I'm going to reduce those. Now that I've selected the polygon cylinder, I'm going to go to the attributes. I'll click on the input tab and the polycylinder itself, and I'll reduce the subdivision axes to 10. Now I want to create the sights. I'll return to the side view of the model. And I'll turn on the template. I'll go to Create Polygon Primitives Cube. Start by dragging a bit of a footprint for the shape. And in my perspective view, I'll give it a little thickness and start to put it into position. I'll return to my side view. I want to add an edge loop here and create this. So I'll click on my edge loop and I'll divide it at that point. Go to my move tool, take the vertex, and I'll drag that down to about here. And we'll see what we have. Alright, now we're going to go down and we're going to do the sight at the other end of the gun. Now this is all very subjective what you actually want to do, but I'm going to create a very basic one. And once again, I'm going to go to the view where I'm looking straight on the edge of the gun itself. And I'll start by creating another polygon cube. And I'll drag the shape out here a bit first. Back to perspective. Introduce the thickness. There we go. And I'm going to go back to this view because I want this to be just a split, kind of a V, kind of an old-fashioned sort of a sight. And that will require me using the edge loop tool. So I'll go in and drop a couple of edges here. And if I put one in the center, I can now go to my move tool, get my vertices, and I can drag those center vertices in to get that kind of a V sight. I'll go back to the object mode and I'll start to put this into position. And I think I'll scale it a bit. But before I do, I think I'll move the pivot down to the bottom so I can maintain the scale and the position where I'd like it to be. And if we go to perspective view now, let's turn off the template and see what we've got here. And you can see we've got pretty much the whole gun in position. Now the next thing I want to do is start refining some of these edges in a very minimal fashion using the bevel tool. Let's start by putting the bevel tool on our shelf. I'll hold Command Shift, click on Edit Mesh, and choose Bevel. It looks like a little orange cube. I'm going to start by refining some of the edges on the front of the gun where we started. So I'll right click and I'll choose Edge. And I'll select that one. And I'll Shift double click to get through that. Shift double click the next three. And I'll bring it all the way around to the other side. So if I hit 4, you can see we've got the edge that we wanted to bevel selected. Now I can access the actual bevel menu or attributes by going to Edit Mesh, choosing Bevel, and going to the attribute box at the end. Or you can hold your Shift key, and if you right click you'll see the option for Bevel at 3 o'clock here. So I'm going to go to the attributes because I want to set this for the numbers that I want. And the width is set for 1 here and then segments are 2, and I'm not sure what I really want with that, so I'm going to hit apply. What that will do is put the bevel on and leave the menu up or the attributes up so that if it's not what I wanted, I could Z out and I could go back and try again. So that looks pretty good. I might go with that. I guess I'll do the top edge now. I'm holding the Shift key down to get multiple selections. And with the menu up or the attribute up for the bevel, I can hit apply or I can hit G on the keyboard and it will give me the same for that edge. There's one other thing I'm going to do before I turn you loose on actually going and refining some of these edges yourself. I'm going to minimize them. I'm going to go around the perimeter of all these. And when I come back, you'll see what I've done, but I want to refine this problem that has arisen of. I want to refine what happened over here. You'll see the stock is kind of inconsistent. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose face, and I'm going to get rid of some of these faces so I can flatten this out like the other areas of the stock. So I'm just getting rid of these. I'll come around to the other side as well. So if we were to take a look, you can see we've kind of punched out all those faces. I'm going to use the Append Polygon tool to patch this up. So I'll right click, go back to my object mode. I'm going to hold down the Command Shift. I'll go to Mesh Tools and I'll click on Append Polygon. And what this is going to allow me to do is close up those seams. So now I can click at the top here, click below, you'll see a pink face, hit return to set it. And I'll come around to the other side and I'll do the same on this side. And we've got these two smaller areas that are open now, and I'll do the same for them. I'm hitting G on the keyboard to access the tool once again. And when I see the pink face, I'll hit return. And I'll save. And now we've got the geometry that we want. I'm going to go and do a little bit more refinement on this, and then we come back, we'll start to think about a bump map for our model. Alright, I've gone in, I've done a minimal amount of refinement. I've added this little bit of footprint that appears in the template as well. And now I'm ready to generate a UV texture map to bring into Photoshop. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll right click on my geometry and I'll choose Assign New Material, and I'll use the Arnold standard. And I'm going to add the checkerboard pattern to this, so I have a proportional UV map when I get into Photoshop. So I'll go through the color tab and I'll select the UV checker and I'll hit 6 on the keyboard. Now I'm going to use a real simple texture mapping on this. I'm not going to get too crazy with this. I'm only going to texture it in a planar map on the z-axis. So I'll hold down the space bar, go to UV, planar mapping, and then I'll choose Z and I'll hit apply. And I want to make sure that in the attributes that the projection width and height are the same. And if they are, then you're okay. Otherwise, change them to a number that is the same. And then we can go to our object mode now. Select our UV editor. If you recall, the UV editor is under UV, and it's the UV editor is the tab at the top. Now I've got it squared the way I want, so I really don't need that checkerboard pattern at this point. And there's our gun. With my object selected, I'm going to go to the UV editor. I'll go to Image, UV Snapshot. In here I'll direct the UV map to my project folder. Give it a name. And make sure the image format is a PNG and the size of the texture is really up to you. So I'll leave it at 2048 by 2048. Choose Apply and Close. And now we'll go into Photoshop. I've opened up my UV map in Photoshop and I've made it red because I'm going to be using white through black values to imply the bump map that we see in the model itself. Now, this starts out as a PSD, and I've got the first layer as a 50% gray. All you need to keep in mind is that white pushes forward and black recedes. So wherever we see the model having some sort of depth, as in here, it's because it's a darker value in the Photoshop map. So I'll go and turn all these layers on that comprise the value differences other than the flat gray for this file. So I'll just click and drag on like so. And you can see in this instance that a couple of things are happening. The handle was from a photo, so if you're not feeling too comfortable with Photoshop, you can always take files from online and cut them up for your purposes. But what you're seeing here around the handle of the gun was a texture map that was generated by the pattern that was made from this configuration. And if we look at the model in Maya, you can see how it's affecting it. The only thing you really have to bear in mind, other than that white pushes forward and black recedes, is that you have to generate a JPEG from your final file. Otherwise, you may have difficulty with Maya actually showing you the file. So once you've got the texture map you want, turn off the UV map, and then save your file as a JPEG. And then when you return to Maya and you apply it by going to Material Attributes, in this instance I've used just a blue color for the actual color of the gun. You could have introduced the texture if you chose to. It could have been a photo of gun steel perhaps, but I'm using a flat color. And then as I scroll down in the color picker, I'm going to see the word geometry. And when I open that up, there are two functions here, both that would require an alpha channel. The opacity and then the bump mapping. And the bump mapping is what I want. So I would follow the bump map checkerboard pattern. You can see now I've already applied my texture, but had I not, it would have been this checkerboard. So I'll click on it. In the Create Render node, I'll choose File, and then where it says Bump Value, you'll see it's introduced a little box with a triangle in it. Follow that out, and you'll be able to get your texture. And apply. And you can see that once you've lit your model and brought up the Arnold Render window, you can see the effects. And that's pretty much the basic workflow for such a game asset. And if we take a look, our poly count is only 607 face, which is very efficient.